I didn't plan to stop that day. I was supposed to be driving straight home, windows up, radio low, my mind already tired before the evening had even begun. But loneliness has a way of making decisions for you. It whispers when everything else goes quiet. And lately, everything in my life felt quiet in the wrong way. My name is Ethan Miller. I was 29, living in a small town outside Phoenix, working a job that paid the bills, and coming home to a relationship that looked fine from the outside. Ryan and I had been together for 4 years. We shared rent, routines, and silence. Not angry silence. Worse, comfortable silence. The kind where you stop asking questions because you already know no one is really listening. That afternoon, the road stretched out empty and pale under the sun. Heat shimmered off the asphalt. I pulled into a roadside gas station, more out of habit than need. As I stepped out of the car, I heard it, the low, steady growl of a motorcycle engine. Not loud, not aggressive. Calm, confident that he was leaning against his bike like he belonged there, helmet tucked under his arm. Black jeans, worn boots, a faded leather jacket that looked like it had stories stitched into every crease. He wasn't trying to be noticed, which somehow made it impossible not to notice him, that I told myself to look away. I didn't. He caught me staring and didn't smile. Just nodded once, like he understood something I hadn't said out loud. I felt my chest tighten, the way it does right before you do something you'll replay later in your head, that I don't know where the courage came from. Or maybe it wasn't courage at all. Maybe it was exhaustion. From pretending. From being invisible in my own life, I walked toward him before my brain could catch up. "Hey," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Hey," he replied. His voice was calm, deep, unhurried. There was a pause. The kind that could have ended everything right there. I should have turned back. I should have paid for my gas and left. Instead, I heard myself say the words that would change everything. "Can I ride your bike?" He looked at me then. Really looked. Not surprised. Curious. Like he was deciding whether I was serious or just another guy chasing a moment he didn't understand. "Ever ridden one before?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, just always wanted to." That was only half the truth. What I wanted, really, was to feel something again. He studied me for a second longer, then let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Name's Lucas," he said, "and that depends on how much you trust a stranger." "I metan," he replied. "And right now? Probably more than I should." That earned me a small smile. The first one. He handed me a helmet. Our fingers brushed, just for a second, but it felt louder than the motorcycle engine. I told myself it meant nothing, that it was just adrenaline, just a random encounter on a hot afternoon. I climbed onto the bike behind him. I felt the unfamiliar weight, the closeness, the hum of the engine vibrating through both of us. When the bike pulled onto the road, the world narrowed to wind and sound, and the steady presence of someone who wasn't asking me to be anything other than there. For those few minutes, I wasn't someone's neglected partner or a man quietly disappointed in his own life. I was just a person moving forward, holding on, feeling the road instead of running from it. I didn't know it then, but that ride wasn't just down the highway to IT, was the first step away from everything I thought was safe and towards something that would force me to face the truth about myself, my relationship, and the invisible line I was already standing on. When the bike finally slowed and pulled off the road, my hands were still trembling, not from fear, from a strange realization that for the first time in a long while, I felt awake. Lucas cut the engine, and the sudden silence rang in my ears louder than the noise had. We were parked at a small overlook just outside town, the kind of place locals drove past without a second thought. From there, the desert stretched wide and endless, soft gold under the lowering sun. "You okay back there?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. I took off the helmet and nodded, a little breathless. "Yeah, better than okay." He smiled again, brief but genuine. Most people don't admit that on their first ride. We sat on the low concrete barrier, the bike resting quietly beside us like it was listening. For a while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that invites honesty instead of hiding it. I told him about my job first. Safe things, small things. He listened without interrupting, without checking his phone or looking over my shoulder like he was waiting for something better to happen. That alone felt unfamiliar. What about you? I asked eventually. Lucas shrugged. I ride. I travel. I stop when I feel like stopping. That's simple. It looks simple, he said. Doesn't mean it always is. There was something in the way he said it that told me he wasn't running toward freedom as much as he was circling it. I recognized that feeling. It made me want to say more than I should have, that I didn't mention Ryan. Not at first. I talked around him instead, about long relationships that slowly lose their spark, about how love can turn quiet without anyone noticing. Lucas didn't judge. He just nodded, like these were things he already understood. People don't usually leave when they should, he said. They leave when something finally forces them to look. The words landed heavier than he probably intended. I laughed it off, but inside, something shifted. When the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in muted pinks and oranges, Lucas stood and brushed the dust from his jacket. I should get going. Disappointment hit me faster than I expected. It surprised me how quickly I wanted more time, how easily I imagined this moment stretching longer than it had any right to. Yeah, I said, trying to sound casual. Of course. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and handed me a small card. Just a name and a number. In case you ever feel like writing again. I took it, my thumb lingering over the edges. I might. As the motorcycle disappeared down the road, I stood there longer than necessary, the wind still echoing against my skin. The ride replayed in my mind, but it wasn't the speed I remembered most. It was the quiet, the feeling of being seen without being questioned. That night, Ryan was already home when I walked in. He was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, barely looking up when I entered. Hey, he said. Hey. I replied that I waited for a question. Any question? How was your day? You're late. Is everything okay? Nothing came. I sat beside him, close enough that our shoulders touched, yet it felt like miles. I thought about telling him where I'd been, about the bike, about Lucas. Instead, I said nothing. And in that silence, I realized how easy it would be to keep things to myself. Later, lying in bed, Ryan asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling. I told myself that what happened meant nothing, that it was just a ride, just a conversation. But the card on my nightstand said otherwise. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about Lucas at unexpected moments. While waiting in line for coffee, while sitting in traffic, while listening to Ryan talk about plans that didn't feel part of anymore. When I finally texted the number, my heart pounded harder than it had any right to. Hey, it's Ethan. From the gas station. The reply came quicker than I expected. Thought you might reach out. We met again, this time somewhere quieter, more deliberate. A small coffee shop on the edge of town. No motorcycles roaring, no open road to hide behind. Just two people sitting across from each other, choosing to be there that we talked for hours. About family, about mistakes, about the parts of ourselves we didn't show everyone. I laughed more than I had in months. And when our hands brushed across the table, neither of us pulled away. I went home that night, carrying something new. Not guilt. Not yet. Hope. And that was what scared me the most. Hope has a way of disguising itself as harmless. That's why I kept telling myself in the days that followed. I wasn't doing anything wrong, I thought. I wasn't hiding bruises or sneaking out in the middle of the night. I was just talking, just spending time with someone who made me feel like my words mattered. But deep down, I knew that line I claimed I hadn't crossed was already far behind me. Lucas and I started meeting more often. Sometimes it was coffee. Sometimes it was long walks through quiet streets where the night air felt cooler and more forgiving. We talked about music, about childhood memories, about the strange paths life takes when you stop fighting where it's leading you. With him, I didn't feel like I had to perform or explain myself. I could just exist. At home, the distance between Ryan and me grew heavier, not louder. He noticed I was distracted, of course. He asked once or twice if something was wrong. I said work was stressful. He accepted that answer too easily, and somehow that hurt more than if he'd pressed point one evening. Lucas asked me why I always checked my phone with that same careful expression, like I was bracing myself for something. Someone important? He asked gently. I hesitated. The truth sat right there, waiting. Yeah, I said. Someone I live with. He didn't react the way I expected. No anger, no judgment, just a slow nod. You should have told me sooner, he said. I know, I replied. And a minute that we stood there in the dim light of a street lamp, the city quiet around us. I felt exposed, stripped of the version of myself I'd been using as armor. I don't want to be the reason someone gets hurt, Lucas said, or the reason you lie to yourself. His words hit harder than any accusation could have. I wanted to say that things were complicated, that love doesn't always fit into clean categories. But all I managed was, I don't know what I'm doing. That makes two of us, he said softly. After that night, things should have ended. The responsible choice would have been to step back, to fix or end what I already had before reaching for something new. Instead, we kept going. Not because we were careless, but because we were honest in the only way we knew how, with each other. The first time our hands held properly wasn't sudden or rushed. We were sitting on a bench, shoulders touching, watching the city lights flicker. His fingers wrapped around mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. I felt the weight of it immediately. Not excitement. Responsibility. I shouldn't. I whispered. He didn't tighten his grip. Then say the word. I didn't doubt at home that night. Ryan asked me if I was happy. The question caught me off guard. I opened my mouth, ready to say yes out of habit, and stopped. The silence stretched between us. I don't know, I said finally. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time in a while. That's not an answer, he said, not unkindly. No, I admitted. It's the truth. We didn't argue. We didn't raise our voices. We just sat there, two people facing the slow realization that something fundamental had changed. I wanted to tell him everything. I also wanted to protect him from the truth I wasn't brave enough to fully own yet. That night, I lay awake thinking about the choices I'd already made and the ones waiting ahead of me. I understood then that infidelity isn't always about desire. Sometimes it's about avoidance, about choosing the comfort of being understood over the courage of being honest. That a few days later, Lucas and I met one last time before everything unraveled. He told me he was thinking about leaving town again. Not running, he said, just moving forward. I don't regret meeting you, he said, but I don't want to be a chapter you hide from. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt the full weight of what I was losing and what I was risking. The road behind him stretched open and uncertain. The road behind me felt closed, but familiar. That I realized then that whatever happened next, there would be consequences. Some quiet, some loud, and none of them could be outrun forever. For the first time since that day at the gas station, I wished I could go back. Not to change what I felt, but to face it sooner. Because standing in the middle of two lives, I finally understood something painful and clear. I couldn't keep riding between them without crashing. The next morning, the quiet in my apartment felt heavier than ever. The bed was too big, the air too still. Ryan was making coffee, humming softly like nothing had changed, like we hadn't both been drifting toward something we couldn't name. I stared at the wall, feeling the weight of every choice I'd made over the past few weeks pressing down on me. I couldn't avoid it anymore. I had to face it. When Ryan sat down across from me with two mugs, I took a deep breath. We need to talk, I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. He looked up, eyebrows slightly furrowed, eyes alert. Okay, he said. About what? I paused. Everything I wanted to say tangled with the guilt that had been building inside me. I haven't been honest with you. About where I've been. About who I've been spending time with. He didn't say anything. Just waited. And that silence was louder than anything I could have said. I met someone, I admitted finally. His name is Lucas. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't plan it. I think I started to feel something I wasn't feeling here. My words faltered, but I forced them out. I know I shouldn't have, and I'm sorry. Ryan put his mug down slowly. You know that hurts, he said quietly, not shouting, not angry, just disappointed. That hit harder than I expected. I know, I whispered. I never want to hurt you. I don't know how to explain it. I felt invisible. You've been invisible to yourself too, haven't you? He asked. There was no accusation in his voice, only observation. I looked at him and saw the truth in his eyes. He wasn't pretending either. He had been quiet, distant, yes, but that distance wasn't what broke things. It was my choice to reach for someone else instead of talking to him. My choice to hide, that we sat together for what felt like hours. No yelling, no slamming doors, just quiet understanding and the weight of reality settling in between us. The kind of quiet that marks the end of something that used to feel safe. I can't stay, Ryan said eventually, almost to himself. I can't live in the middle of this, of you being torn in two. I understand, I said, even though my chest felt like it was breaking. That we didn't fight. We didn't curse or storm out. We just accepted it. Two people who loved each other in a way that no longer fit. And maybe that's the hardest kind of love, the one that ends not because of hate, but because of truth. After he left, the apartment felt emptier than it had before. No music, no quiet hum of the TV, just the echo of choices I couldn't take back. I thought about Lucas, about the freedom I'd felt on that first ride, about the laughter and the shared silences that had felt like safety. But I also remembered the card he had given me, the number I'd clutched like it was a lifeline. And now, I realized that freedom wasn't without consequence. Emotional closeness, even when safe in the moment, could fracture everything else. I couldn't keep living in pieces. Days passed. Lucas stopped replying to my messages as much, subtle distancing that mirrored the quiet in my apartment. It wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no confrontations. Just the slow pull of reality, showing me that actions, even when small, leave marks. And no one gets to avoid them. I went for long walks, thinking about honesty, responsibility, love, and how quickly comfort can turn into complacency. I thought about Ryan, about what we had lost, about how the absence of one thing can make you reach for something else. That by the time the sun began to set over the desert again, I knew I had to face my own choices fully. No excuses, no rationalizations, no blaming distance or loneliness. I had crossed lines, and now I had to own them. That it wasn't easy. It still isn't. But that moment of acceptance, that recognition of my own mistakes, was the first step towards something I didn't yet have a name for: growth. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the smallest spark of clarity. Painful, true, necessary. The kind that comes when you finally stop running from yourself. Months passed, and life settled into a quiet rhythm that was unfamiliar but honest. The apartment felt lighter without Ryan, though not in the way I had imagined freedom before. It wasn't excitement or relief, it was space. Space to think, to reflect, to understand what I had done and who I had been during those moments of recklessness and longing. I spent my days working, walking the streets of the town, and taking long drives along the desert roads I used to avoid. Sometimes I would glance at the horizon and imagine Lucas riding past, the wind in his hair, the hum of his bike echoing freedom. Those thoughts stung at first, but over time, they became lessons rather than regrets. Freedom isn't just the absence of responsibility. It's the courage to face the consequences of your choices. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, I found myself at the overlook where it had all begun. The air was cool, the world quiet except for the distant hum of a car on the highway. And there, just beyond the bend, I saw a motorcycle glinting in the fading light. My heart skipped, hope stirring briefly that it wasn't Lucas. He rode past without stopping, a fleeting silhouette against the desert sunset. And instead of disappointment, I felt a strange sense of closure. That glimpse reminded me that some connections aren't meant to last forever, that sometimes people enter your life to teach you something, to remind you of parts of yourself you've forgotten. That I leaned against the railing, letting the wind brush my face, and thought about Ryan, about Lucas, about myself. The heartbreak, the longing, the mistakes, they were all pieces of the same puzzle. Pieces that didn't fit neatly, but that together formed a clearer picture of who I wanted to be. That I realized that love isn't always about possession or certainty. Sometimes it's about truth, even when it hurts. About courage, even when it scares you. About honesty, even when it means losing what you thought you couldn't live without. I had been chasing a feeling, a spark, a fleeting connection, but what I really needed was understanding of myself, of others, and of the lines I refused to cross again. That be why the time night fell. I had walked down from the overlook, the cool desert air calming the restlessness in my chest. I knew I would continue to feel echoes of the past, reminders of choices made and roads taken. But I also knew I had changed. I had learned that growth often comes from pain, and that love, in its truest form, begins with honesty. As I drove home, the headlights cutting through the desert darkness, I thought about the future. Not about rushing towards someone else or running from the past, but about being present in my own life, about being honest with myself, with anyone I allowed close, and about moving forward with intention instead of impulse. That I knew I would remember Lucas, remember the ride, the laughter, the closeness, and the lessons. But I also knew that I could carry those memories without letting them define me. They were part of my story, yes, but they weren't the whole story. And for the first time in a long while, I felt calm, whole, ready for the road ahead. Not chasing, not hiding, just moving forward with clarity and self-respect. The mistakes of the past would always be there, but now they were lessons, not chains. And that made all the difference. The night was quiet, the desert endless. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Not because someone made me feel seen, but because I finally saw myself clearly.